Shadow crystals. What are they? Or more importantly, what do they show us? Hello everyone, I am Deltarune, and welcome Hello everyone, I'm Player Carter, and welcome to Rune 9999 plus 1, where in today's lecture we will be covering what is the Night's Deal? You know, it supposedly wants to cause the roaring, but it hasn't caused the roaring yet. But causing the roaring is easy, right? Just stab the ground a bunch of times. So, why hasn't it caused the roaring? Is it stupid? All these questions and more will be covered in this lecture. So, does the Night actually want to cause the roaring? And my answer to that is yes. The Roaring Night wants to cause the roaring. It's kinda in the name. You know, we're all Deltarune fans here, we can read. So then, why hasn't the Night caused the roaring yet? Because it can't. Yet. How do you even cause the roaring? Well, simply just open enough dark fountains to cover the world in darkness. That's generally what we know is required to cause the roaring. Now, we don't know the exact specifics, how many dark fountains need to open, or if they need to be opened in a special way, they need to be outside leaking into the sky, or maybe opened inside of another dark world. We don't exactly know, but generally, you need to open enough dark fountains to cover the world in darkness. Multiple dark fountains. So, how do you open a dark fountain? Well, you course determination into a blade and strike the ground. Duh, everybody knows that. Here's the catch. You require determination in order to open a dark fountain. This is where the Night falls short. Because to cause the roaring, you need to open multiple fountains, as we've established, yet we have never seen a character open more than one fountain at a time. With one exception. When we get to the church, there are already 2 fountains opened. Fountains opened by the Night, of course. And judging by the calls that were made in the holiday household, the Night just got to the church. So both these fountains were made at the same time, simultaneously, back to back. Which is very important because this is the only time a character has been implied to open more than one fountain at a time, which is, of course, a requirement to cause the roaring, as we have established. So this is very important. And there's a very important detail about these 2 fountains. The first one we seal in the lobby of the church is considerably smaller than normal. As you can very clearly tell by this comparison, it's a completely different sprite. It's half the size of a normal fountain. This implies that less determination was used to create it. You use determination to create a dark fountain, so the smaller the dark fountain, the less determination. That makes sense. Now, of course, there's a reason that this is the case. There's a reason that this particular fountain, less determination was used to create it. That being, the Night ran out of determination when it opened 2 fountains at once. The Night has a limited amount of determination. Now, oh yes? That's a great question, and it leads me to the next slide. However, of course, while determination can run out when making a fountain, it can also be regained. You know, we know this because, save points are all about filling you with determination, at least in Undertale, and it's implied in Deltarune. Of course, if determination can be gained, it can be lost. Now, of course, this is how the Night can open the 3rd fountain in the church that spawns the Titan. Now, of course, this complicates things, because at least an hour passes between these 2 fountain openings, between the first 2 that are opened in the church and the 3rd one. I know that may be splitting hairs a little bit, but the song names 12 AM and 13 AM do support this. There is a considerable amount of time between these 2 fountain opening periods. As we see, it's a major point of contention, really. The Night has just been waiting throughout Chapter 4. It locks itself behind a door and just waits there. Waits for what? What is it doing? Well, I believe it's buying time to open another dark fountain. Because, of course, it takes time to open another dark fountain, as I've been arguing. So, conclusion. The Night cannot indefinitely open multiple fountains at once. And I think we can all agree that that makes sense. It makes sense that you cannot just repeatedly stab the ground and just open as many fountains as you want. I think we can all agree that it somewhat makes sense that that is the case. Now, of course, this greatly complicates any attempt at causing the roaring. So, the knight's plans need to account for this. So, what is the knight's plan? Well, given that its limited determination is what is holding it back from its intentions, the knight's plan must be to obtain more determination. Well, how do you obtain more determination? Well, given that determination is life force, as we know, the only way you can obtain more of it is by taking it from living beings, as we also know. In other words, to take the life force from a living being, a sacrifice. And I'm sure you can connect the dots here. That is exactly what the knight has been doing. The knight's current efforts have been to kidnap Lighteners to sacrifice them, with, of course, Undyne so far. This sacrifice is the extraction of determination, because, of course, a sacrifice implies some sort of ritual. It's not just murder. Of course, the knight isn't just needlessly murdering people, it's gaining something from these sacrifices, as we've heard them as. And I believe what these sacrifices are gaining is determination, the extraction of determination, the extraction of life force from a living being. Why I believe this makes sense is this explains why the knight kidnapped Undyne instead of Toriel, because, there's been a lot of contention on why the knight was going for Toriel, but then it goes for Undyne. It resorts to kidnapping Undyne. Why is that? Well, I believe it's because the knight simply isn't targeting anyone in particular. It's just targeting anyone that has a determination that it can extract. It was going for Toriel, and then Undyne became the better option, so it resorted to Undyne. Now, the knight takes its kidnapping victims into the shelter. So what's in the shelter? Why is it taking it into the shelter? Well, as we can hear from this audio, it sounds somewhat like a machine. It sounds like there is somewhat of a machine in the shelter. And of course, to give a bit of context about this particular machine, it is a very slowed down version of garbage noise, the noise that plays outside of the shelter. That sounds like a machine. And this garbage noise, which of course is the noise that you hear when you use the phone in the dark world, and of course, entry 17, entry. So this machine is likely related to, and that makes sense because is definitely the one to be tied to machines. He invents a lot of machines. And there's one in particular that really fits this goal that the knight has of extracting determination. That, of course, being the determination extractor. Makes sense, right? And this plan that the knight is currently doing, it's working, because the knight only starts opening more than one fountain at once after they kidnap Undyne. So it's possible that they've already started extracting determination. Every other chapter before chapter 4, the knight has only opened one fountain in each of those chapters. But in chapter 4, after it kidnaps Undyne, it's suddenly able to open more fountains. Why might that be the case? Because it's kidnapped someone, it's extracted their determination. Now, I know it might seem a little janky that it sounds like I'm kind of making up mechanics here, but I want to make it very clear, I'm not making up anything. You see, extracting determination and determination levels were very relevant concepts in Undertale. You've seen I've already referenced some evidence from Undertale. Of course you have True Lab, where it was all about monster kind extracting the determination from the souls to gain the determination to break the barrier. It's about obtaining more determination. That was a major
plot point in Undertale. One of the biggest plot points in obtaining more determination to fit some goal, to break the barrier or at least pass the barrier. And of course you have Omega Flowey, who
could save and load
Flowey could save and load before the player came, because they had the most determination. Then the player came, and then they could save and load. So, and when Flowey gets the human souls, they have the most determination again. Their goal was to obtain more determination to become more powerful, just like the knight in this argument. So, they could save and load again.
So this idea of gaining determination, extracting determination, this follows precedent. You know, it's not just a made-up gimmick. This is following a real pattern. You know, this is the way determination works as I have been working with it in this theory so far. It's followed the precedent set by Undertale. And of course, determination hasn't really been set up that much in Deltarune yet, admittedly. But I do think it's fair to say that it will probably follow somewhat like how it behaved in Undertale. So I think it's valid that I am following this precedent that is very clearly set in Undertale. So, the knight's full plan. Step 1, kidnap Lightners for their determination, to extract their determination through a sacrifice. Step 2, of course, extract the determination of the Lightners for fountains, to make more fountains. In step 3, open fountains to cause the roaring. In step 4, profit? Now, admittedly, what's there to even gain from the roaring? What does the knight have to gain? Because, you know, isn't the knight a lightner? Yes. What does a lightner have to gain from the roaring? You know, as it's been described to us, the roaring kind of just sucks for everyone. Darkness will be turned to stone, the earth will be destroyed, and lightners will be lost eternally in an endless night, as you can see here. And so, who does have anything to gain from the roaring? I can't really think of anyone, except for one character, if you'd call him a character. That being the Titans/Spawns. You know, of course, they're the ones that carry out the roaring. They're the ones that destroy the world. They're the ones that are unleashed in the roaring. So, you know, if they want anything, it's the roaring. Of course, they're not said to have consciousness, but if they want anything, it's to cause the roaring. And the reason I mention this is because the knight has a lot of similarities with these characters. Like very distinct similarities that only they have. Of course, as you can see here, they're all black sprites with a white outline, and when they're damaged, they turn to static, in a way. And of course, that's just a visual similarity, but there's also deeper similarities, which I can make a whole video on, but, I mean, just take my word for it. These are the same thing. So it would make sense that the very beings that carry out the roaring, them being connected to the knight, so the knight wants to carry out the roaring. You know, they're very connected characters. They're very connected beings, you know, nightmare darkners, as I would call them. Of course, I could make a whole video on what exactly they mean. But yes. So in conclusion, the roaring knight wants to cause the roaring. It's just more complicated than what you might assume. And that is everything. Oh, yeah, there's my works cited.